Discworld is a masterpiece, but it's a slightly confusing one, so I'm going to guide you through where to start and how to read it. Discworld is Terry Pratchett's magnum opus, a sprawling world set on a disc on the back of 4 elephants on a turtle that naturally swims through space. The pinnacle of satirical fantasy. This is, in my view, a must-read for fantasy fans, but it's also a 41-book series with no wrong place to start. Now, that means there are 41 right places to start. Now, if you're like me and you go to a restaurant and you look at the menu and you panic over the number of good options, and then the person serving comes over and you're like, la la la, and just blurt something out of sheer blind panic, then having 41 options is not a good thing. So I'm going to make this video in order to try and help you choose and simplify it and turn it from a long menu to a slightly shorter menu with some recommendations as to where I think personally the best places to start are, depending on what kind of reader you are. Now, for those of you screaming into the screen, just read it in publication order, I don't recommend this. It's not wrong. There's no wrong order to read these books in, although reverse publication order arguably would be wrong. But publication order is not going to optimize your experience of the Discworld's universe. This is because Discworld is going to jump around about as much as a monkey with ADHD. And so we're going to start with one character, and then we're going to move over to another character, and then we're going to move over to a different theme and a different part of the world and a whole new cast of characters. And then we're going to move back to that first character. So rather than just reading them in the order of publication, a lot of people have started reading them in groups, sub-series, if you will, divided by character or by theme or by place. This is brilliant, and naturally you would think very simple and straightforward, let's just read it by sub-series. Unfortunately, there's no official sub-series list. There are 2 different publishers who've published in kind of sub-series, and they both publish them in different ways. Then there's a Reddit fan list that's a 3rd way, and then there's Goodreads, which has done it a 4th way. Which is lovely, isn't it? But thankfully for you, I am a genius, and so I've spreadsheeted all of these in Excel, looked through them, compared, and created a big master list of how to read this series. Now, let's actually talk about some of the books in this series rather than just me waffling in background, because that's occurred for quite a long time. First up, chronologically, we have the Rincewind Subseries. This starts with the first 2 books in Pratchett's Discworld, and the average position of these books is 15, which means they're generally taking place a little bit earlier chronologically than some of the other sub-series. Nonetheless, not the best starting place in my opinion, if only because these first 2 books are a little bit weaker. Pratchett's still trying to find that magical spark that a lot of the other Discworld books have. That said, it's not a wrong place to start. There is no wrong place to start. And also, I started here and I still adore the Discworld series and this sub-series as well. Now, this series is about Rincewind, who is a wizard who is not particularly competent and also very, very determined not to end up on any adventures. Now, I suspect you know that he does end up on many adventures, and he grumbles about it, and it's wonderful. The next 3 sub-series, I would say, are probably my recommendations for where to start. And next up we have The Witches, which starts at book 3 and has an average chronological position of 12.7, which means these are again happening earlier than the other sub-series. This is actually the lowest average, so generally happening earlier, which is a good thing in a starting point, I would say. The Witches sub-series follows 2 main characters, Granny Weatherwax, who is kind of like a Granny Smith apple, you know, those kind of bitter green apples. She's very cranky, she's a little bit touchy. She's very Brat, if you're familiar with Brat. If you're not familiar with Brat, then you're probably the typical Discworld fan. I feel like there's not a massive crossover, but we've made the reference now. Nanny Og, on the other hand, is pudgy, she's charming, she's wonderful, she's delightful, she's like a warm, fresh loaf of bread. Another strange metaphor, and both food related. We're going to move on to the next sub-series now, and that appears first with book 4, and it is the Death sub-series, which follows Death, anthropomorphized into a 7-foot tall skeleton, which does it for some people. It's not for me personally from a sexual perspective. This has a chronological average of 15.4, which puts it slightly above Rincewind, but again, I would put it above Rincewind as a starting place. It's one of my top 3, and it's fantastic, hilarious. Death appears in almost all of the Discworld books and is one of Terry Pratchett's best characters, but these specific books follow Death a little bit more closely, and his fascination with humanity and what it actually means to be a human. Very kind of philosophical, as always, hilarious and entertaining. This actually isn't one of my favourite sub-series, but it is a lot of people's favourite of all of the sub-series, so definitely another great place to start. We have the City Watch sub-series next. This starts with book 8 chronologically, and it's my favourite sub-series of all the sub-series, and that's why I think it's a brilliant place to start, even though it does sit chronologically with an average of just over 23, which is much greater than the sub-series we've discussed so far, and it gets a little bit deeper into the series. I don't think that's a problem, really. This follows this fantastic cast of characters. The City Watch, which is essentially the police force of Ankh-Morpork, which is the major town within the disc. Brilliant, brilliant series. We get a lot more character diversity than some of the other sub-series, which follow largely a single or a few characters. This follows far more. They go on adventures across different areas of the disc as well. They are often under-resourced, often battling politicians or accidentally working with politicians. Lord Vetinari is the dictator of Ankh-Morpork, and he's a fascinating character, and we see lots of him in this sub-series. Another very strong place to start. So if you are looking for somewhere to start, those 3 sub-series I've just mentioned, The Witches, Death, and The City Watch, are my personal recommendations, but if one of the other sub-series sounds really interesting to you, for sure, check that out. Alternatively, there are a few standalones, which are great places to start within Discworld. These are books that don't quite fit into the sub-series so neatly, and the first we have come as a kind of pair in that they're very, very vaguely interconnected. Very, very vaguely. And that is Pyramids and Small Gods. Pyramids sits at book 7, and Small Gods, I believe, is book 13. And these explore things. Pyramids, as you can probably guess, if you have any ability to guess anything ever, is vaguely ancient Egypt inspired and follows an assassin. I'm not saying you can guess the assassin bit, that bit is, more difficult to guess, but the ancient Egypt bit you can definitely guess. And we also have Small Gods, which follows a god who gets stuck in the body of a turtle, and he is pissed about it. He is not fucking happy. Brilliant places to dip your toe into Discworld before you pick a specific sub-series to focus, or if you do make the decision to read in publication order, against my advisement, by the way, then maybe dip into one of these first and then make that decision for yourself. So the 2 sub-series I don't think you should start with, but I'm going to include here for completion, and so you know that you can jump to them next after you've maybe read one of the other subseries in this list, is the Industrial Revolution subseries. This has an average chronological position of 29.2, which is very late, and that's one of the reasons I don't think it's a great starting point. And the other reason is that it's a more mashed together subseries in that it's really two subseries, but that's not as neat, so people call it one subseries. And the first of these two subseries, so the subseries, is thematically linked by the idea of inventions. So we see various things being invented in the Discworld and how those impact the world of the disc. So, for example, the printing press is invented and things then occur because of that invention. The second half of the Industrial Revolution subseries, the subseries 2, also follows inventions, but we also get the introduction of one of my favourite characters, Moist von Lipwig, who is a rogue, who is a scoundrel, who is turned into someone whose main job in his first appearance is to turn around the post office in order to bring it back to life because it is being killed off by an alternative competitor run by people who are rather corrupt. And Lipwig does other things in other books, but that's how we're first introduced to him, and he's fantastic. So the second subseries I wouldn't necessarily recommend starting with, and our final Discworld subseries, is the Tiffany Aching subseries, which has an average chronological position of 35.2. Now, I will say, before you read the Tiffany Aching series, there is a standalone I'd read before, which somewhat fits in, and this is our last standalone as well, so we will have covered every single Discworld book in this video, and that standalone is The Amazing Maurice and His Educated Rodents. This is aimed at a younger audience, as is the Tiffany Aching series. So if you're going to start with this subseries, I would say start with it because you're reading with a younger child, or you are a younger child who's watching this video, because I guess young children exist on the internet, which is slightly terrifying. Hi. The Tiffany Aching series, as you may have guessed, follows a young girl called Tiffany Aching, who essentially is a badass and often has interactions with these little blue Picts called the Knack McFeagles, who are little bitches, but there may be kids watching. Stop watching. They're little bitches who are kind of annoying, but also very lovable and fantastic and brilliant. And don't start with this subseries unless you are reading with a younger kid, as I've said. But definitely read it if you're happy reading young adult books, because they are definitely young adult. That's the goal of the books, but they are also still fantastic. Hopefully this has been helpful. If it has, please do like, please do comment. If you want to subscribe, go for it. And also share this with someone who may be struggling to work out where the hell they start with this series, because I know it's very confusing.